Hi everyone, welcome back to the Sports Breakdown once again. So, it's been 27 long years since Sri Lanka last won a ODI series against India, and they did it perfectly. Who expected Sri Lanka to even win a match against India in Sri Lanka? Although it's away, for India it's away. Although that happened, who expected Sri Lanka to bounce back, especially after a series defeat, a whitewash defeat in the 2020 series? But Charith Asalanka and the men really delivered in the ODI series, and we've got Nicholas Brook joining us. I think he joined our channel before when we discussed about the Sri Lankan squad analysis for the 2020 World Cup. But it's been a while, Nick. And he features regularly for the Murali's End. Plus, he's a writer and journalist as well. So welcome back, Nick. It's great to have you, and it's great to have some positive news in Sri Lanka men's cricket. Because the women's cricket has been buzzing around after winning the Women's Asia Cup, and it's great to see the men's team actually beating India in the ODI series after, a terrible defeat in the 2020 series.
Oh, pleasure to be here, Pavan. Thanks so much for having me back on. And yeah, what a difference a week makes, right? The women had this incredible Asia Cup triumph at the same time as the men were bumbling around in the T20I series. They conspired to somehow lose that third T20I with just a remarkable sequence of events. And so I think that there was understandably a bit of doom and gloom, a bit of trepidation coming into this series. And then just three of the most incredible games. I think we did a Murali End preview a while back, and I said if Sri Lanka could win one of the 6 matches across the 2 formats, it would be a great result. So to go 3 ODIs unbeaten is just absolutely incredible, especially given those 2 routings last year where they were 50 odd all out, and the way that the T20I series played out. This is just an absolute dream result. I hear that the atmosphere in Colombo was incredible. It's so great to see Ketarama rocking like that. Feel like we haven't seen that in some time. And moving forward, I just feel like getting these wins over India, it's a great start to Asalanka's tenure as captain, and it's something that I think will fill this side with confidence.
Absolutely. So first of all, let's talk about Charith Asalanka, winning the toss, thrice in the series. Do you think that was a huge factor in Sri Lanka winning the series? Because we saw Sri Lankan batting first, they post around, I think, 230 in the first match, then they scored 240 and then 248 in the third ODI. Do you think the pitch sort of behaved well for Sri Lanka to post those kind of totals in the first innings? Because we saw in the second innings that the pitch sort of helped a bit for the spinners. It's favored a bit for the spinners, and it turned a lot, even though there was a bit of dew, although, but still we saw the pitch turning really wild. It was spinning really wildly, and there was a lot of turn, and the spinners extracted a lot of spin. We saw them bowling at the right lines. So your thoughts towards obviously on the toss factor? Do you think that played a huge role in Sri Lankan winning matches?
From my perspective, it's difficult to tell, Pavan, because I was surprised, given a sort of a pitch which looked like a minefield, that Sri Lanka selected to bat first in the first ODI. I think the first over that Akshar Patel bowled, you could see he got a ball into kind of Arshdeep's footholds, and it not only turned massively, but it also got really big bounce. So you had balls spinning viciously, and also some balls really rearing up off the deck, which we're not that used to seeing at Pramadasa. People always talk about it as a slow and low pitch. And so certainly through the first 2 ODIs, I thought that the pitch looked tricky to bat on in both innings. In the third ODI, I thought when Pathum and Avishka were making that stand up front that it looked to be playing a little truer, but then it kind of seemed to get harder to bat on as the innings progressed. I think given that we didn't see Sri Lanka chase at all, it's difficult to tell. I think that India possibly didn't apply themselves. Maybe they're not as used to batting on these kind of tracks as Sri Lanka's batters are, and that played a factor. But it would seem that possibly these pitches got harder to play on under lights, and that, Asalanka won the toss 3 times, chose to bat first 3 times without hesitation, despite knowing that it was a tricky pitch to bat on. My kind of instinct was that on a tricky pitch, do your strong suit first, bowl, see if you can get the other team out for a low target, and then you know what you're going for, so you don't have that lingering thought in your mind of, do I need 250 plus, do I need 280 plus? But clearly, yeah, bat first was the way to go, and I think that probably had it was a factor in Sri Lanka winning these games, although how big a factor, I think, isn't that discernible given that we didn't see it reversed at all during the series.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you think, Nick, like the sort in the like the pictures given by Sri Lanka, do you think that it was like proper standard? Because we see like the fans sort of complain like Sri Lanka could have offered like flat pitches, like But we know of in the press conference that Rohit Sharma said like you can't complain about the pitches, because no matter whether it's spun or whether they give flat tracks or whether it offers spin or whatever, you have to adapt, and that's what India actually haven't done. But do you think the pitches offered by SLC, I mean the curators of the Premadasan, have they done justice, for this series, especially seeing how the conditions behaved in this series? Any thoughts on that, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that one of the things that makes cricket such a beautiful, entertaining, enjoying game is a broad diversity of conditions. I don't want to see flat tracks all the time. I think if every game is 350 plays 350, some of the enjoyment of the spectacle seeps out of the game. So I'm totally happy with the pitches as they were for this series. I mean, I want to see batting friendly pitches. I want to see spin friendly pitches. I want to see seaming pitches. That variety makes the game far more interesting from my perspective. And I thought that from a fan's perspective, from a viewer's perspective, I thought that these matches were fascinating to watch. They had twists and turns. Sure, we didn't see an abundance of sixes, but they rewarded players who found a way to get through tricky periods and bat properly. We've drawn a little bit of kickback on the Murali end by saying that we don't think that Sri Lanka should play on these kind of pitches all the time. I understand maximizing home advantage, but I think we've got to face the kind of facts of the way that cricket is moving and the trajectory of the game. And bilateral series are becoming kind of increasingly less important. And I think that everything that Sri Lanka does over the next couple of years in ODI cricket should be with an eye towards South Africa and the World Cup. So I would like to see them playing on all kinds of surfaces. I think this team needs to play on flat tracks as well as on spinning pitches. But yeah, for a one-off series, I don't have any problems with the way the Premadasan pitches played. And I thought that they produced enthralling cricket, and really we can't ask for much more than that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get some from the comment section before we move on. Hari says, since 35th over, since Sri Lanka batted, ball has took a lot of turn. Yeah, coming to the third ODI, Nick, thoughts on how Sri Lankan approach, because they were 171 for 1 in that 32nd over. Obviously, Avishka Fernando scored a well-made 96, and Pathum Nisanka and Avishka had a good opening partnership. And then after that, they were in a very good position after 32nd over. But the sort of mini collapse that Sri Lanka had, yes, they managed to score 248 at the end. But your thoughts on how Sri Lankan middle order batters actually handle themselves against Riyan Parag. Riyan Parag has been brilliant in this series, by the way. He's a part-time off-spinner, but he really bowled really well. Do you think the ball sort of got difficult because it was an old ball? Do you think that it was difficult for the batters to actually score runs when the ball was getting, kind of old and, kind of getting that turn for the spinners or whatever? So your thoughts, because Kusal Mendis sort of played a conservative role until like the 46, 47 to protect his wicket or whatever. But your thoughts on that, Nick?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly the wickets got much harder to bat on as the ball got older. And I think we saw that throughout the series, really, because, I mean, if you look across the whole 3 ODIs, Charith, Sadira, and Janet Lianage kind of struggled for runs throughout, which I think suggests that trend that the wickets got harder to bat on as the ball got older. I mean, yesterday it was a funny one because when Avishka was batting, or just before he got out, I thought Sri Lanka really needed to be looking towards a score of 280. And then you're right, Pavan, it was really a mini collapse, wasn't it? Things just seemed to come to a standstill. And I think in hindsight, we've got to applaud Kusal Mendis and say that that was a really mature kind of considered innings, that he didn't feel like he had to score at a run a ball. He took his time. He played himself in. I know a lot of people online were saying they wanted to see him go earlier. I think that's difficult when you're losing wickets around you. And I thought that the pacing of his innings was great. He timed it really well. He was unlucky to be out from a catch where Shubman Gill's foot looked to be on the boundary rope. And
Yep.
I think Kamindu Mendis deserves a little shout out too, because in both the second and the third ODI, he came in and provided a really great finishing punch. I mean, he's been having a bit of a golden year, hasn't he? We've seen really good performances from him across all three formats, having been kind of on the fringes of the team for a long time without necessarily making the impact that I think many people expected of him. So it's great to see his development. I think he looks like a clean ball striker, a guy who is really versatile in that. I mean, we've seen him bat top three in the T20s and do well in the power play. We've seen him come in the back end here and do well. So yeah, I'm excited to see what he can do moving forward. And we also, what was great to see through this series, especially in the first and second ODI, was kind of grit and determination from Sri Lanka's lower middle order when, you know, they got themselves into positions where it looked like they could be bundled out. And every time they managed to find some way of recovering and getting themselves up to a defendable score. So that's great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Dunit Velalage, because he has been brilliant in this series. Scoring with runs. I think he scored 172 runs, if I'm not mistaken, and then picked up 7 wickets. So your thoughts on Velalage, because with the bat he's been performing well. He's really scored well in the first and second ODI when Sri Lanka were under pressure, when the top order sort of failed, and then the middle order had to step up. And in both ODIs, Dunit Velalage ensured that Sri Lanka managed to score 230 plus. So his maturity has been brilliant. He scored his highest individual score in this series. Plus, he picked up a 5-wicket haul. He's never done that before. So he seems to have sort of a good patch against India, because in the Asia Cup, we saw Dunit Velalage troubling the Indian batters. And this time around also, he got, I think, Virat Kohli twice. He got him out. And then Rohit Sharma also, I think, he got twice. So thoughts on him, because I think, I feel like after Sanath Jayasuriya, I think they've found a brilliant all-round in Dunit Velalage. And I have no words to tell about him, the way that he's been performing. He's still only 21 years and he's showing this much maturity. So your thoughts, Nick?
Fantastic breakout series for Weller, wasn't it? And it's just so good to see. I was chatting to the Muralian gang about this yesterday, and I said that he reminds me a little bit of Pathum Nissanka in the sense that every time we see him, he seems to be adding new strings to his bow and developing really fast. I mean, he's still so young. He came into the side as a schoolboy, and he just seems to get better and better. I mean, really such crucial innings in the first 2 ODIs. He looks to have added a bit of power to his game. I think that was something that people were skeptical about, right? Is he a guy who can come in and clear the ropes? Is he able to score quickly enough to make him valuable in white ball cricket? And I think he's on his way to really proving that. He had a different approach to most of the batters in that first ODI, right? He went for a lot of sweeps and he looked like he was going to get out a few times early in his innings, but he found a way, dug in, and really made it count. So, I mean, it's great to see him developing with the bat. I think he looks like he's got a good technique, especially against on spinning pitches. And yeah, I mean, I think the sky's the limit for him. I think that he can bat further up the order in good time. I think that he'll become a 3-format cricketer for Sri Lanka. And I mean, with the ball, he made crucial breakthroughs, right? It's easy to forget now that when Rohit and Gill were batting in that first ODI, it looked like they were going to breeze towards a 230 run target and take the game away from Sri Lanka. And he picked up those wickets that really changed the face of the game. And then yesterday, I thought he bowled well all series. He didn't have such a good time in the second ODI, but then yesterday he really got his rewards. And, on a pitch like this, you see where the ball's spinning big. He's able to bowl those nice arm balls which slide onto the pads. I think he got Kohli with that one yesterday, which was really nice. And I think he's just seems to be developing. He's maybe bowling slightly quicker, figuring out how to vary his pace according to the pitch. He's still so young. I think we're going to see a lot more growth from him. And it's really exciting. Hugely promising to see a guy as well who can contribute with bat, ball, and in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Pathum Nissanka as well, Nick, because Pathum Nissanka has really rose in the last 2 years. I think in 2022 he had average of only 16 and his strike rate was 73, and now his average is 44, and I think he scored through 600s, and he's scored plenty of 50s. He scored a double century this year. He's the only batter to score 3 centuries, ODI centuries in 2024. So Pathum Nissanka has been brilliant this year. So your thoughts on Nissanka, because he's really groomed as a batter, and I think he's really boosted his confidence. So your thoughts on Nissanka and his growth in the past 2 years?
It's just been an absolute joy to see. He came into the team with a lot of hype, right? And I thought initially, as I think a lot of people did, that Test cricket was going to be his best format, his most natural format. And I have to admit that I was skeptical about his ability to score fast enough to make a real impact, especially in T20 cricket, but also to an extent in ODI cricket. And he's obviously worked incredibly hard behind the scenes, and to see the leaps and bounds that he's made, it's just wonderful. I thought he batted really well again here in the first ODI and the third ODI. He was unlucky to get a really good one from Siraj in the second match, and maybe unlucky not to get that big score. But now I feel like he's reaching a stage where every time he comes to the crease, I'm kind of expecting runs from him. He seems to be just flowing with confidence, right? And I think he's understood his game better. He's really good on the leg side. That's his six hitting area around mid-wicket cow corner, when he especially against the spinners, when he can just rock back and play that kind of pull shot. But he's always been a sweet timer of the ball. He's got great placement. He can score runs down the ground now, and I think he's getting to a stage where it's really hard to figure out where to bowl to him. You look at what the steps he's made in terms of his strike rate in T20 cricket over the past year, and it's just night and day from the batter we were seeing 18 months ago. And again, like Weller, I feel with Pathum, really that the sky's the limit. Like, this guy is a huge future star for Sri Lanka, and I can't wait to watch him continue to grow over the next few years.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, Nick, let's talk about Jeffrey Van der Sey, because he's another unsung hero in this ODI series. Picking up 6 wickets in the second ODI. No one expected him to, deliver, because he was a replacement of Hasaranga. I mean, he was in the squad, but he came because of obviously Hasaranga getting injured. And, straight away, he made a big impact with his, obviously, he's a leg spinner, and, he bowled the googly and, the stock delivery really well. I think he varied those 2 variations really well, and, just shell shock the Indian batters, and picking up 6 wickets under lights, it's just incredible to see, such a vast improvement. I know he's 34 years, and, his career is almost going, to a end, but halt, but still, he's peaking at the right time, and that I think that the experience also counts. So your thoughts on Jeffrey and Van der Sey, because he was out of the scenes, although I think he picked up another 5-wicket haul against Zimbabwe 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, but still, the way that Van der Sey has been, whenever he gets a chance, he's taken it with both hands. So your thoughts on Jeffrey Van der Sey, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on with what you say, Pavan. Every time Van der Sey's gotten a chance, he's taken it with 2 hands. I mean, it seems remarkable because he's been on the scene around the team for ages. He's only played 24 ODIs. And I mean, you look at his record, he's averaging 26 with the ball, going at an economy well under 6, under 5.5 even. Look, I think at the start of this series, a lot of people were surprised and perhaps disappointed to see both Akila and Van der Sey picked in this squad, right? I think there were many people, myself included, who were saying, look, Viaskant's just had a really good IPL. He's a young guy. He is someone who Sri Lanka can use for the future. Why aren't you picking him instead of 34-year-old Van der Sey? But Van der Sey bowled fantastically, right? As you say, he mixed in the googlies just beautifully and, I mean, stunned the Indian batsman, right? He got Kohli with a beautiful one. I mean, it was great to see. Clearly the pitch was giving assistance, but I thought he bowled brilliantly. And I feel bad for him that he wasn't backed, in the pre-Hasaranga era as he probably should have been.
Yeah,
I think that you look at what he's done and you look at a guy who I think probably should have played a lot more cricket for Sri Lanka than he has done. The situation is, I think, at the moment that, at 34, he's always going to be probably a backup to Hasaranga when he's fit. But I mean, look, I don't want to cast shade on anyone, but we saw Dushan Hemantha play at the ODI World Cup. I think Van der Sar looks like he's a much more threatening leg spinner than Hemantha looked like in that
yeah,
tournament.
absolutely.
And so, I mean, it's really positive to have him around the team and around the squad. And I mean, I think one of the great things that Sri Lanka are developing at the moment more generally is a pool of players, right? There was a time 5 years ago when it felt like that really didn't exist, and it almost felt like you were struggling to fill the 11. Whereas now, I mean, the situation's turned on its head, and there are guys who are really bustling their way into this team. And,
Absolutely.
that can only be a great thing for the country's cricket when you've got 16, 17, 18 guys who are really putting their hand up for selection.
Absolutely. Do you think like Hasaranga will still be ahead of Van der Sar in ODIs, although Van der Sar has been performing whenever he's given the chance? Do you still think like Hasaranga will be back as the main spinner in ODI cricket, or do you see like Van der Sar challenging him and probably taking that spot from Hasaranga with the way that Hasaranga's form has been in the past couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no denying that Hasaranga hasn't been in the best form over the past couple of months, and that it's been a trickier period for him, especially with that T20 World Cup where he took a lot of the grief, some of which I thought was unfair. I think you have to look at the body of work that Wanindu Hasaranga has produced over the past 2-3 years and see that he's a really important cricketer for Sri Lanka moving forward, a generational talent who offers an all-round package, right? I still see him as one of the best ball strikers who Sri Lanka have right now. And not many players from the island have gone to the IPL and dominated, have got towards the top of the rankings in, as a bowler and as an all-rounder. And so, I mean, I think Hasaranga still has to be the number one, pretty much one of the first names on the team sheet. But Van der Sar's in a position now where he can be coming up on the outside and put pressure on him. And if he keeps performing every time he played, I mean, the 6 wickets, which completely transformed the second ODI, will, carry the headlines. But he was introduced late in the third ODI and I thought played really well, played an important role in finishing that match off. So, yeah, I mean, it's Van der Sar is no doubt putting pressure and saying to selectors, you've got to pick me. And I think that can only be a good thing. And I think that will be something which also spurs Wanindu on, having a bit of competition, knowing that he has to really bowl well to keep his place in the team. Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely. I also want to touch a bit on Akila Dhananjaya as well, because he's also been playing ODIs after some time, and he performed really well with both the bat. I think he contributed a lot in the lower middle order in the first and second ODIs. It's such a shame that he didn't play the third ODI and Teekshana replace Akila. But I think Akila bowled really well also with his carom deliveries and with the stock delivery that he had. He really troubled the Indian batters, put pressure on that especially the top order of Indian batters. So he gave a lot of pressure. So your thoughts on Akila Dhananjaya with the both the matches that he was given a chance, and do you think he could have played the third ODI as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, I was a little skeptical about the inclusion of Akila Dhananjaya because it feels like he's had his time, he's had his chances. But it's remarkable that he's still only 30, a guy who's been around for years and years. And yeah, I mean, he's still got gas in the tank. And I thought that he bowled really well. It was interesting in the first match when he was bowling to 2 left-handers. He looked like a different bowler to me, much more of a classical off spinner, giving the ball flight, getting big turn. But then you see him bowling against right-handers and he's still pulling the same old tricks, right? Bowling leg breaks, bowling carom balls, bowling googlies. So I think what you're seeing there is, spin bowling is one of these things that the older you get, you learn, it's a real art which you have to master. And look, Akila's been out of the limelight. He hardly played in the LPL. I don't think his domestic returns have been great for Sri Lanka this year. But I think you see there a guy who can still contribute, who on spinning wickets is a real nightmare. And as you say, Pavan, he did really well with the bat too. I wasn't that disappointed to see Theeks come in for the third ODI. I mean, in fact, I was pleased because I think Theekshana is a great cricketer, a guy who's really young and who's going to really needs to be a centerpiece for Sri Lanka moving forward in both ODI cricket and T20 cricket. I like the idea of him opening the bowling because, you know, he can get that swing. He bowls. He's got subtle variations, kind of turning the ball both ways. And just it's something a little bit different. I mean, it didn't work out that great. His, Rohit got after him in the first couple of overs yesterday, although he almost got him out. You know, there was that one where he almost played on, and he came back and bowled a really good second spell, I thought. So I was happy to see Teeks yesterday. I think that, to be honest, these pitches probably favored spinners who bowl a bit slower and give the ball a bit more flight. But it's just great that we're now looking at a really deep pool of spinners, right? And you've got someone like Viaskanth on the outside of that. So now, you know, it's not one or two guys, it's 5-6 guys vying for spots in the team, which is just, it's great to see.
And we didn't see that like 2-3 years ago. I don't think there was that much competition for Hasaranga. And now all of a sudden we see like 3 or 4 spinners trying to take that spot from Hasaranga and maybe Tikshana from that ODI team. So that's great to see. But coming to the fast bowling contingent, Nick, we saw, you know, Dushmantha Chameera, Matisha Patirana, Nuwan Tushar, so many injuries, you know, and then Hasitha Fernando had to, step up, because we know Hasitha Fernando is usually being considered in the test setup, but then he had to obviously, he had a very good LPL. I would feel, yes, his economy may have not been that great, but, I really think that Hasitha Fernando really stepped up when needed. Yes, he leaked some runs, at times he was a bit inconsistent, but, he really delivered when mattered, especially in the first story. I think he swung the ball really well with that old ball. I don't know how, but he really bowled well in the spells in the middle overs, especially. And the way that he got Rohit Sharma out in the third ODI also was really good. So your thoughts on Hasitha Fernando and how he fared in this series, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see his development as a white ball bowler, right? I think there's never been any question about Asitha's quality in tests, and that he is looking like he's going to be a really generational talent for Sri Lanka with the red ball. But I've been so impressed by what I've seen with him, both in the LPL and in this series. I mean, you're right, Pavan. Sometimes he'll go for runs, but I think the important thing is that he takes wicket-taking ball. He bowls wicket-taking balls. And, even on pitches like this, which don't seem to offer a great deal for spin bowlers, he can be really dangerous. And he took a wicket, when he came back with his second spell in the first ODI. I think it was, I can't remember who it was. Was it Shreyas or was it KL Rahul who he kind of nipped one back and it took his off stump? Shreyas Iyer, yeah. And, that just shows that he's a guy who you can call upon. You can ask him to come back and pick up a big breakthrough and he'll deliver, because there was that time, I think, in that first ODI when Kohli and Shreyas were batting together and it looked like they were going to take the game away from Sri Lanka. So yeah, it's great to see Asitha Fernando bowling really well. It's a bit worrying to see the injuries mounting up again. Look, I think, with the style, particularly that Patirana and Tushara bowl with, and Madhushanka to a lesser extent, but that slinging style, it puts a huge amount of stress on your body. And we saw Malinga during his career put on a lot of muscle, and that sort of helped to ward off the injuries to an extent. I think Patirana and Tushara are still both in that stage where they're building strength, and I hope that they're not going to be scuppered by too many injuries moving forward, because I think they're such a dynamic pairing for Sri Lanka in white ball cricket, such a dangerous duo. And I mean, especially Patirana, a guy who's still so young, who really produced in the IPL when he could get on the park this year. So keeping him fit has to be a huge priority for Sri Lanka. Really disappointing to see Chameera again, suffering with injuries. And I think maybe we're getting towards the stage with Chameera where we have to accept that he, a clean bill of health for a long period looks a bit unlikely.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's get a comment from the comment section. Hari here says 27 wickets lost to spinners by India, most by against any team. Your thoughts on Indian batters struggling against spin? That's very interesting. Usually we see the Indian batters really good with the sweep shot, but we didn't see the Indian batters using that sweep option against Belalage or even Mandase or even Tikshon in the ODIs given. So your thoughts on how come? I mean, how India are losing wickets against spinners? Because I don't know, like usually they're really good players of spinners, especially KL Rahul. I think even Virat Kohli is really good against batting in spinners, but for some reason they really struggled in this series. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's strange to see India struggle so much against spin, right? I can't remember seeing an Indian team struggle against spin so much since 2008. You know, that period when there was the Asia Cup when Ajantha Mendis burst onto the scene, and then the Test series that followed where Ajantha and Murali really had them in lots of trouble. You're right to say, Pavan, that they were reluctant to commit to the sweep, which, is something that both, Sri Lanka's batters, both of a guy like Avishka and a guy like Gwalalage use with a lot of success. I think probably, these guys in the India team, they've been playing the IPL for a long time, and then they've been at the T20 World Cup where they did come up against some tricky pitches, but I think on the whole, they've probably just gotten used to playing on flat tracks and are a little bit rusty when it comes to these kind of conditions. I think these pitches were difficult to bat on because not only the big turn, but the way the ball was leaping on occasions and really bouncing. Turn and bounce is what spin bowlers want. And it's interesting that often it wasn't those big ripping deliveries that got the wickets, but it was the ones that went straight on. And you can just see that uncertainty that's in the batsman's mind, right? You look at Kohli, who was kind of beaten by not picking balls, right? I think it was a couple of googlies and an arm ball from Walalage that did him LBW in all three. And so, yeah, I mean, it's tough to explain because, Indian batters like Sri Lankan batters grow up on dusty subcontinental pitches, and you expect them to be good players of spin. They've got a reputation for playing spin well, and they just really didn't through the course of this series.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk about, Charit Asalanka as a captain, because, the way that he led in this series was brilliant according to me. But your thoughts on his fielding tactics, and, his approach to the bowlers, giving them confidence, and also your thoughts overall on Asalanka's captaincy in his first ODI series and, delivering. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought he handled things pretty well. I didn't see anything really in terms of field settings or bowling changes to be concerned about. The one thing that kind of struck me was I thought it was a little strange picking Shiraz in the first ODI, given the way the pitch played, and that presumably Sri Lanka were aware that this was going to be a really strong spinning pitch. I thought it would have made more sense to, go with Kamindu as they did or include Theeks. But then it's great to see them, being flexible, and they pivoted fast in that second game and introduced Kamindu to both lengthen the batting lineup and give them another guy who can bowl a few overs. It was nice to see Kamindu bowling some left armers. I think Charith needs a much longer leash, but I think this is a great start to his tenure. I think this is going to give him lots of confidence. There were some criticisms of some of his tactics during the LPL. So we'll see how things play out. But I think this is a really promising start. I think having Sanath alongside him for the time being is going to be good because, Sanath's an ex-captain himself, a really influential figure within the Sri Lankan scene who can take some of the heat off Charith. I'm sure that Sanath is kind of able to impose a bit more authority behind the scenes than, say, a overseas coach like Silverwood might have been able to. I'm happy with the way Charith started, but I want to see a lot more before making a judgment, really.
I can't remember whether it was you or Dominic, but one of you said that Hasaranga should have remained as 2020 captain and not Charit, because we saw in the 2020 series, Charit. I mean, I don't know, like his performance hasn't been that great. Yes, they may have won the LPL with Jaffna Kings, but I think Charit suits more in the ODI format, and his captaincy sort of suits in the ODI towards that field more than the 2020 because his batting performance hasn't been that great in the 2020 format, especially with his strike rate a bit. although he has been the most consistent 2020 batter, I feel like he sort of struggled with handling both the captaincy and with his batting as well in that series. So do you think we should give more time for Charit to settle as a captain, or do you think it was the right choice for I mean, Hasaranga did step down, I think, due to pressure from social media, and he stepped down. So the SLC had no choice but to appoint Asalanka as captain. But do you think that was the right choice by making Asalanka as a 2020 captain, in your thoughts? Because for me, ODIs, yes, definitely Asalanka has proven, but 2020 in the 2020 format, I'm not really sure whether Asalanka was the right choice.
Yeah, look, I think time will tell, Pavan. I mean, I personally, I was disappointed to see Hasaranga step down because he had such a short tenure. And I mean, you never want to see a guy come in, get the captaincy, and then be gone within 6 months, right? It just you want to see longevity. You want to see an idea that building blocks are being put in place and that things are developing with a bit of continuity, with a bit of clarity. I mean, I always think of the analogy of like my football team, Chelsea, who change their manager every 5 minutes, and it seems hard to build something that's going to move forward. And I feel like, Sri Lanka cricket has sometimes fallen into that trap. I think you're right to say that Charith, maybe hasn't done as well as we thought he might have done in T20 cricket. I think his best performance is still from a couple of T20 World Cups ago when he was batting at 3. And, whether he'd rather be batting in the top 3, I'm not sure. But I think it's good to have the T20 captaincy and the ODI captaincy united under one guy. I like that rather than split captains across all 3 formats, because it just means that you can kind of build a stronger culture. The messaging's the same. And look, I mean, I think what I'd really like to see is just Charith get a long leash. Obviously, everyone's very high at the moment off the back of a great series, but we know that Sri Lankan fanship can be quite fickle, quite tumultuous, and that, when things come crashing down, if there's to be a bad series, that suddenly the calls are for his head. So I would call for a bit of equanimity and kind of, long-term thinking, and give Charith a good bit of time to settle into the role. He is going to make mistakes. He is going to learn. And I think that only after we've seen a proper sample size can we really judge.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Sanath Jayasuriya. I think you touched a bit on his coaching, but we have to talk a bit more on his coaching skills, because yes, I was a bit critical of Sanath, and I do apologize because I didn't expect, all of a sudden in the ODI series, for him and the team to change things. But, really, he should be given credit with the way that they fought back in the ODI series, because it was really bad to see Sri Lanka losing so bad in the 2020 series. But, in the ODI series, really, the team really stepped up, and, Sanath really played an influential role. And he also said, I think, in a tweet that, Lasith Maling has been helping a bit with the bowlers on Zoom calls, and Kumar Sangakkara has been giving batting advices to the batters, apparently. And then they brought in, because of Sangakkara's friendship or whatever, they brought in the Rajasthan Royals batting coach, I think, back in the before the 2020 series started. So your thoughts on Jayasuriya, the way that he's handled so far? And I think there was a post right now saying that Jayasuriya might not accept the long-term post of Sri Lankan cricket, being the head coach. It's fair enough, he's a busy man, and, he has other plans and all that. But where do you see this going if Sanath is not going to accept the head coach for the longevity of Sri Lankan cricket? Do we actually go with a local coach who knows the understandings of these cricketers? Because we see there is some sort of improvement with these cricketers when they are coached by such legends like Sanath. So do we go back to these foreign coaches? Because it's really not helped. Even though Silverwood has a good record, we saw, certain series they did well, but didn't really do well in ICC tournaments. So your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, it's a really complicated one, isn't it? But I think that what we can see clearly is that what Jayasuriya brings, 2 words which I think are both really important. One, inspiration, and the second is influence, right? You've touched on it, like being able to put a call out to Malinga and get him to mentor the bowlers over Zoom. That's huge, not not only because Malinga's got an amazing bowling brain, but because of how much I imagine all these guys look up to him, being able to draft Sangarin. And, Sanath is one of the great heroes for kids growing up who love Sri Lankan cricket. I think that he can do a lot to inspire these guys. And also, I think if you look at the trajectory of his own career, right, he came into the team in 1990. It wasn't really until the end of 1995 that he started to find his feet in international cricket. And, the way that his career changed overnight as a result of, I think, more than anything, developing an inner confidence and self-belief. I think, if Sanath takes that and speaks to a guy like Avishka Fernando and, gets that messaging across, I think that can have a huge difference. So, yeah, I mean, I was a little bit skeptical about the Jayasuriya appointment. We're hearing different things about whether he wants it long-term or not. Time will tell. But I think another thing that, local coaches have, which is an advantage, an unassailable advantage, is just speaking Sinhala, right? That ability to communicate more clearly in greater detail without a language barrier, I think is really important. And so whether it's Sanath, whether it's someone else, I certainly wouldn't be unhappy to see a local coach take over on a more long-term basis. I mean, I think in the past, people have said that local coaches struggle to kind of stay out of the politics, which sometimes comes alongside Sri Lankan cricket, the machinations of the board. And, that could still prove to be a problem. We saw it with Hatra Singha, right, who did a wonderful job with Bangladesh and has gone back and done a really good job with them again, kind of having a pretty tricky short tenure in Sri Lanka. So look, it's not an easy role to take, whether you're a foreign coach or a local coach. It's one that comes with a lot of scrutiny, with a lot of expectation, with maybe not quite the resources which exist for coaches in other roles. So certainly it's not an easy thing to do. And I don't know what's going to happen next. It'll be really interesting to see how the team go in England in the Test series. I think if they do well, then we're going to see more and more calls for Sanath to stay on. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out.
Absolutely. One more point before we head into the squad analysis for the England series. I just want to talk a bit about Sadira's form because it's a bit concerning. Yes, they've been sticking with Sadira, after how he performed in the ODI World Cup. He did score well in that match against Pakistan and all, but the three ODI matches that he played, he failed in all three. It's a bit of a concern because, sort of the top order, like the number 4, has been failing a bit, and he got dropped in the 2020 circuit also, not been performing well, and he could be pressurized in the ODI format as well, seeing how other players are coming up in the ranks. As Nishan Madhushka could take his spot and then they could push them down. There's Pawan Ratnaik, who's been performing well in domestic cricket now, and he really is competing because he plays in the number 4 spot and he could be in the squad really soon if Sadira keeps on failing. So Sadira is a bit under pressure. Yes, I see why Sanath is backing him. They backed Avishka Fernando and see what Avishka did in the third ODI. So it's good to see that they are backing players when they are out of form. But how long can they be backing Sadira, according to you, Nick? Because he is a good player, but how long can we keep on, giving him chances in order for him to come back to form?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to say, Pawan, it's a little concerning that, Sadira, who looked like one of Sri Lanka's best players last year, who played some really good innings, really kind of stabilizing innings, that he hasn't been able to buy a run this series. I mean, to a lesser extent, Janeth Lianage, who did great when he came in before, had a little bit of a quieter series too. I mean, I always think it's better to give players a longer leash than get rid of them too quickly, right? Someone like Sadira has made his way into the side by batting really well over a number of years in domestic cricket, and then has done well when he's got in and has just had a lean run. So I hope he stays in the team for a little while. I do think that ODI looks his most natural format. I wasn't convinced by him as a T20 player, especially his ability to strike fast enough. I think the jury is still somewhat out about the idea of him as a test match keeper. But in ODI cricket, I'd like to see him stick around. But as you say, there are guys are outside of the squad, like Madushko and Ratnayaka, who are pushing to get into it. There's also Kamindu Mendis, who is, he batted at 8 in this series, and Kamindu can't bat at 8 moving forward. He's too good a player, and on bowler friendly pitches, that's just, on more batting friendly pitches, that's just not going to work, right? So whether they see Kamindu as a 4, maybe whether they see Kamindu as a 6 and Lianage as a 4, there's options, which is always good. But I certainly don't think Sadira should be discarded. But I think we're reaching a stage where you see Pathum, Avishka, Kusal Mendis, and Asalanka as the 4 guys who are kind of locked on with spots in that top order, or in the batting lineup in ODI cricket at the moment. And then there's competition for the rest of the places. And I don't mind seeing a bit of rotation. Someone, you want to see someone really grab one of those spots and make it their own. But so tough to see Sadira going through a little kind of a lull in his slump in his form. I don't think he should be discarded, but whether he's an automatic pick after this series, I think is also questionable.
Yeah, I want to touch a bit on Kusal Mendis also, because yes, Kusal Mendis scored a 50 yesterday. He played a very sensible knock, but we see a lot of fans, everyone saying, Kusal Mendis is playing really, really slow. His strike rate is very concerning in ODIs, and he's being a bit conservative. And after 130 odd innings, he's only still scored 300s, and I don't know who gets a longer tenure in this team than Kusal Mendis at the moment. Yes, he's one of the most talented batters that Sri Lanka have right now, but we saw what happened in the ODI World Cup also. Once before getting the captaincy, we saw a different Kusal Mendis version, him scoring hundreds and him being very explosive. But when he got the captaincy, his form completely went the total opposite, and he really failed. But in the Indian series, yes, he failed in the first 2. He got those 30s and 40s, but still didn't convert those to the big scores. And Nick, this is a big issue with Kusal Mendis. A number 3 batter usually has to convert those 50s into hundreds. He's getting the 50s, Nick, but he hasn't really managed to convert those 50s to hundreds, and that's an issue that a number 3 batter usually actually has to get 100. It's either the openers or a number 3 that has to stay until the 40th or 45th over and ensure that the team gets to a good score around 300. But not been seeing Kusal Mendis doing that either in Sri Lanka or either in the overseas conditions when it's batting friendly pitches. So your thoughts on Kusal Mendis, because a lot of criticism is coming that in ODIs and tests he should be dropped and he should only be considered for 2020 because in that format he's been performing well. But I don't know, is he a three format player according to you, or should he stick to one format? Or your thoughts on that, Nick?
Yeah, I think he's still a 3 format player for me. It's a mind-blowing stat that he's only got 3 ODI hundreds, and I don't think that anyone would disagree with the fact that that is not what we'd expect from a player of Kusal Mendis's talent. But you look at those 2 innings he played in the World Cup last year, against South Africa and against Pakistan. You look at the way he batted yesterday, and I think that you see a guy who's got a kind of a versatility and ability to play according to the situation and ability to play the kinds of innings which not very many batters in Sri Lanka can. And so I think that it's worth persevering with him simply because of that. I can understand why people might have been critical of him during this series. It's when a guy is getting out to slow starts, is kind of scratching around a bit for 10 off 20. It doesn't look great, but I think we've got to contextualize what other batters were doing in this series, what someone like Virat Kohli or KL Rahul did in this series. And, I think that Kusal clearly came in, had an approach and thought, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to hang around and try and get to a stage where I feel comfortable and then look to accelerate a little bit. And in hindsight, I think his innings yesterday was really, really important. Had he got out early, I'm not sure what kind of score Sri Lanka would have got to, but it could have been something that India chased down and we could be looking at a drawn series right now. So I think that was important. I think that also, showcased the fact that he can play all kinds of innings. That was a really sort of a mature, considered kind of finisher's knock. And yeah, so I think for the time being, it's definitely worth persevering with Kusal. I mean, I think the numbers are, in terms of his average in ODI cricket over the past couple of years, is better than people online would necessarily believe or want you to think.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I still think that there is a more talented player in there, and that we might see that before his international career is over. I mean, another guy who can take heart from Sanath's story, right? And it's not just Sanath. You look at someone like Aravindo, or you look at Tilakaratne Dilshan, and you know, there's been a trend with Sri Lankan batters that they've promised a lot from the start of their career and delivered in dribs and drabs. And then, you know, as they get older, as they get into their 30s, suddenly they start to understand things, and that extended purple patch comes. And, you know, I'm not saying that Kusal is a player who is of the quality of Aravindo or Dilshan or Jayasuriya, but I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised if he still has one of those runs and he shows us, you know, because this is a guy who we've been talking about now for what, 8 years, since he was 22, as a really, you know, a guy who's going to be a crucial cog for Sri Lanka. And in a way he has been, but there's still that feeling that there's more which is waiting to come out. And so yeah, I think we're going to see it at some stage.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, Nick. So let's go into the England Test series coming up. So that starts on the August 21st. Since you're living in the UK, Nick, just want to know the situation in UK. Do you think it's safe for the Sri Lanka tour of England to take place? Because we are hearing reports that you know, Sri Lankan players are unhappy with the security that England cricket possesses right now, and they're saying that you know, obviously the racism things are going on right now. Over there, obviously the immigrant riots going on in UK right now, and I think the rest of the squad is going to arrive in on Sunday. So you know, the ECB security plan is going to be set. So your thoughts? Is it safe to play in UK right now, or what's the status right now in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, look, there's no denying that the situation in the UK right now is pretty toxic, and seeing some of the things which have been posted on social media, I can completely understand why the Sri Lanka players are reluctant to travel to England and why they might be concerned for their safety. What I would say is that this right-wing minority, you know, of thugs and idiots, is, you know, it's a really small group of vocal troublemakers. And, you know, I think that the majority of the English public is disgusted by some of the scenes that we're seeing. You know, diversity is, in my opinion, a large part of what's made Britain such a beautiful place. I think most people share that opinion. You know, I think we saw last night in places like Walthamstow and Brighton, the anti-fascist riots, you know, people taking to the streets in huge, huge numbers to show that we don't, as a country, accept this kind of narrative, that we don't, we won't tolerate this kind of racism in England. And so I think that that's important to bear in mind. So look, yeah, I can understand why the Sri Lankan team would have concerns about coming to England, but I would hope, and I really wholeheartedly believe, that 99% of this country will welcome them with open arms, will be delighted to see them back on our shores for a test tour. And you know, it's been 8 years since Sri Lanka played a test in England, which is the longest gap since they got test status. And for me, that's a really sad thing. I think, you know, that this is an important tour. The narrative around test cricket more broadly has, you know, it's been that, you know, there's the big teams and the little teams, and you know, the teams who are considered less influential, less you know, lucrative big markets are getting less and less tests. And a lot of English journalists have already thought that the series is 3-0 done and dusted before it gets going. So, you know, I want to see Sri Lanka come. I want to see them compete. I want to see them play, you know, play exciting cricket. I want to see the joy of Sri Lanka's fans flooding into English grounds. And yeah, I'm touching wood. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that is still going to happen. And I think that the series will proceed without any problems. So I hope. And yeah, just personally, really disgusted to see what's been going on in towns and cities across the UK.
Absolutely. Coming to Sri Lankan Test squad, so we have Dhananjay De Silva as captain, Dimuth Karunaratne, Nishan Madhushka, Pathum Nisanka is back. We'll be touching on Pathum Nisanka a bit. Kusal Mendis, Angelo Matthews, Dinesh Chandimal, Kamindu Mendis, Sadira Samaravikrama, Prabhat Jayasuri, Ramesh Mendis, Jeffrey Vandase gets a call up after a long time, Asita Fernando, Vishwa Fernando, Kasun Rajitha, Lahiru Kumar, Nisara Taraka, and Milan Ratnaika. Thoughts on Pathum Nisanka getting the call up? We were waiting for Pathum Nisanka to obviously get that test recall, but he's got it back. Obviously, I think they were trying to not bring him back into test because, for him to focus on the limited overs. That's, I think, the plan that Mickey Arthur had 3 years ago, and they've, kept him out of the test circuit for like 2 years. But now he's back. Nick, do you think that's the right time? Because it's the WTC championship going on. Sri Lanka, I think, are fourth right now after those two victories against Bangladesh, and we hope to see Pathum Nisanka obviously performing well in this England series. But your thoughts of Nisanka coming back, and where do you think Nisanka can play? Because we see there's Dimuth and Madhushka opening. Do you see Nisanka batting at number 3, or will he bat in the middle order, or will he take Madhushka's spot, Nick?
Yeah, I'm delighted to see him back, and I think it's absolutely the right time. Sri Lanka cricket take a lot of stick for some of their selections, some of their decisions, but I think they've got this one spot on, that bringing him back into the fold at a time when he's full of confidence. And, as you say, Pawan, we've got through the ODI World Cup, we've got through the T20 World Cup, so there's no real pressing white ball tournament on the horizon. Yeah, I think it's the perfect time for him to come back. I was surprised when he was dropped, to be honest. He was dropped after that Australia series when he got out early a couple of times, I think, to Mitchell Stark kind of fishing at balls outside his off stump. But that happens. And I was really shocked that he wasn't given a longer leash. I guess in hindsight, you have to say that it's allowed him to really focus and develop his white ball game, which has been a huge boost for Sri Lanka. But I don't see any reason why Pathum can't be a 3-format player and a 3-format success moving forward. I would expect him to play the first test. I don't think they would have brought him back into the squad just to carry drinks. And as things stand, I think I'd expect him to take Madhushka's spot, which, look, it would be tough going for Madhushka. He obviously did really well when he came in against Ireland last year. The returns since haven't been quite as good, but I thought he looked okay in the Afghanistan series without necessarily making a big score. But yeah, I would probably see Pathum taking his spot for the first test.
Yeah. Haria says Nisanka at 3 best option at English conditions, but I think there's Kusal Mendis who's vice captain right now, and he's currently having the number 3 spot. So I don't think Mendis will get demoted in the batting order, or what do you think?
I just don't see them moving away from any of Kusal, Chandimal, or Angelo at this stage. I think you also look at England's a tough place to come and play cricket, especially for cricketers from Sri Lanka who haven't batted there before, right? It's the blessing for Sri Lanka is that it's later summer. It's been fairly hot here by our standards. So we're hoping, for flatter, kind of drier pitches, which are a bit more like what we see in the subcontinent. But yeah, I think the experience of those guys is going to be crucial. And, Chandimal and Matthews have both been enjoying really good runs in Test cricket over the last couple of years. So I would really be surprised if any of those 3 aren't in the team. I can see Nisanka as a guy who can bat 3 for Sri Lanka moving forward. And maybe once Chandimal and Matthews move on, that might be the kind of natural order of things, that he moves to 3, maybe Kusal moves down to 4 or even lower in the middle order. But for this series, I think it's difficult to see that because, of course, Dhananjaya is going to play. He's captain. And then I think they'll want to get Kamindu Mendis in, right? Given what he did in Bangladesh. And
so I don't think there'll be a spot for Chandimal, right? Because I see like Matthews coming at 4, and then probably DDS at 5, and then probably Kamindu at 6, I think, will be the most likely option. And there's a competition between Kamindu and Sadira, which we'll have to talk. But I don't know whether there is a spot for Chandimal in this playing 11 right now, Nick.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd assume that Chandimal would bat at 6 and maybe keep, and then that Kamindu would come in at 7, and then we'd see just a 4-bowler attack, probably with 3 seamers, Vishwa, Asitha, and Kumara if he's fit for the first test, and Prabhat as the spinning option. That I think would be the team that I would go for.
Yeah.
I like that. I like the look of that side. I mean, you've got 3 seam bowling options. You've got the spin of Prabhat plus DDS and Kamindu. You bat deep till 7. The only real issue I think is that, you know, from 8 to 11, the batting does fall off a cliff a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that would be the 11 that I would go for Old Trafford. But we'll see. No, there's certainly a few ways that this team could line up. And I mean, yeah, Nisha Madushka will be pushing for selection. Sadira will be pushing for selection as the keeper. So I wonder how the team management and selectors are thinking about things, whether there are still spots up for grabs, how important that one warm-up game is going to be. And also, I mean, I think another thing to consider is, right, that like half the squad or slightly less than half the squad have been in England for a while and have been acclimatizing. And so whether that factors into their thinking, because, you know, these guys who've just played the ODI series, who I assume will be maybe getting on the plane tomorrow or over the weekend, aren't going to have a huge amount of time to adapt and acclimatize. And, you know, being thrown into English conditions, it's not going to be easy, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on the team, and they're going to come up against, you know, this England bowling attack. It doesn't have Broad and Anderson, but what it does have is some, you know, guys in the form of Mark Wood and Gus Atkinson who are going to be bowling really quickly and putting up some hostility for the Sri Lankan batsmen. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see how things play out over the next week or so.
Yeah. Do you think is there a practice match for Sri Lanka before the England Test series, or there is no practice test matches this time around for Sri Lanka?
I think there's one 3-day game. Mark from the Marillion mentioned to me that he thought it was going to be at Worcester, but I haven't seen a ground officially announced. But there is one 3-day game next week. So, I mean, look, that's not loads, but it's something. At least, you know, we've had Vishwa playing in the county championship early in the season, and we've had a number of these guys, you know, be in England for a little while now. Matthews, Chandimal, DDS, Kumara. Really hope Kumara's going to be fit and firing, because I think if he can come on as a first change bowler and bowl with good heat and bowl, you know, that tight 4th, 5th stump line, that he can be impactful. I think Asitha is going to be crucial for Sri Lanka, you know, and at least he got a little bit of time at Notts last year, so he is somewhat accustomed to English conditions. I think it's a really exciting series in prospect. I just can't wait for it to get going.
Yeah, Hari, yes, Matthews and Chandimal have played in England 2014 Test. Sri Lanka beat England in that Test series. So how crucial will that experience from Matthews and Chandimal be in this Test series? And I think even Kusal Mendis played in that 2016 Test series where Sri Lanka did lose 2-0 to England. So I mean, and even Dimuth played in both the series. So I think it's a bit experienced this team. So your thoughts on Matthews and Chandimal mainly and their role?
Yeah, I think it's very important having 4 guys in that top 7 who have played in England before, and especially in Matthews and Chandimal, guys who've enjoyed success, right? Angelo got that 100 at Lords in 2014. I think Chandimal's got an ODI 100 at Lords. So, you know, that takes away a bit of the fear factor, a bit of that trepidation, because, you know, I know that for Sri Lanka sides, coming to England is a big deal, especially playing at somewhere like Lords, which, you know, has this tag as the home of cricket. And I mean, it's quite different experience. The last test I watched Sri Lanka in live was at the SSC against Afghanistan in February, in front of a crowd of about, you know, 150, 200 people at Lords. And, you know, at all 3 tests, they're going to be playing in front of big packed houses, 30,000 people every day. The majority of them cheering for England, expecting Sri Lanka to roll over, thinking that this Bazball team can score 500 in a day against Sri Lanka's attack. And they're going to come under pressure. Ben Stokes is going to go after them from the outset. We've seen the way he captains that it's not just aggressive with the bat, but constantly aggressive in the field, looking to pick up wickets at every opportunity. So there's going to be a lot of pressure. And I think having guys who have been around the international scene, in Matthews and Chandimal's case for 15 years. And yeah, I think that experience is going to be really, really important. I think we saw the West Indies were lacking it a bit in their top 7, and that they kind of folded with their batting at times, and especially the top order, and that their bowlers weren't quite able to prop them up the way that they hoped they could. And so I think that Sri Lanka have a bit more to offer with the bat than the West Indies did. So yeah, we'll see. I'm really excited.
Yeah. Final question, Nick, before wrapping things up. How do you see this series going on? Like series predictions, do you think Sri Lanka will manage to win a test match, or do you think there'll be a drawn match, or do you think England will simply whitewash Sri Lanka 3-0? How do you see it going?
I would love to see Sri Lanka win a test. I can't see a draw unless we have a game which is heavily impacted by weather, which, in England is always a possibility that you get a day and a half's rain or 2 days rain across the course of a test. And then naturally the draw comes much more into play. I'm going to go 2-1 England, Pawan. I think that I think Sri Lanka have the firepower to win a test, but there are a lot of intangibles, a lot of unknowns heading into this series. We aren't 100% sure what kind of pitches we're going to get. We don't know who's going to open the batting with Ben Duckett for England, and
they said it's going to be Dan Lawrence, right? Most likely.
I think that seems it's most likely going to be Dan Lawrence, which is an interesting one. A guy who's been on the fringes of the team and been in squads for a long time, but hasn't played a test under Stokes and McCullum. A guy who bats in the middle order and who I think is, really more of a lower middle order batsman at test match level, a 5 or a 6. So whether that comes off, whether it backfires, will be interesting to see how Sri Lanka's bowlers, it's a big series for Prabhat, right? Who's played 90% of his test matches at Gould on pitches which offer a lot of assistance. How he goes if he's faced with flatter pitches will be fascinating. The flip side is someone like Asitha, who's played most of his test matches. I think only 3 of his test matches have come outside of Asia. So how impactful he can be if he gets, seaming wickets, a little bit of overcast swinging conditions. There are all kinds of really, really interesting narratives and subplots around this series.
Nick, I just had a question, like how will Sri Lankan batters cope with Mark Wood's pace? Because we saw how Mark Wood was bowling 150 plus against the West Indies back this month. He's seriously having some raw pace, and we know that Sri Lankan batters really don't have that much experience facing 150 plus, and especially on pitches that assist the seamers a lot. And we know how Mark Wood is very effective with his short deliveries and with his full length deliveries as well. So how do you think the Sri Lankan batters can cope with Mark Wood, and what can be the approach for Sri Lankan batters? Because I don't know what sort of approach they can go with in terms of facing Mark Wood.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a worry, Pawan, because, he is bowling lightning fast right now. And yeah, Sri Lanka in the past haven't necessarily dealt with that raw pace that well. And the worry is, like we saw, I think on the last day of that West Indies series, where he just goes bang, bang, bang and takes wickets in bundles. And I think especially against the lower order, the thought of him coming on, it's really, really daunting. I think the one thing that Sri Lanka have in their favor is that the 3 tests are really close together, right? We've got 3 back-to-back tests in a short space of time. We haven't seen Mark Wood play back-to-back tests in a really long time for England. I think it's unlikely that happens in this series. And, it's not entirely unimaginable a situation where he only plays one of the 3 tests. So, they can take some solace from that. Gus Atkinson is also bowling quickly, bowling in the 90s, 145 plus. If not quite as quick as Mark Wood, he's still a daunting prospect. So Sri Lanka are going to have to deal with pace, and they're going to have to deal with it well. Look, I think they will probably be targeted with the short ball at times. I think It's easy for me to say here, sat in my living room, but you've got to be brave and prepared to wear some. I think at times, if you're gonna duck and weave, and you're gonna take a few on the shoulders, on the chest, and try and grit your way through it. I don't think that happy hooking is gonna be the way out. But we shall see. I think what can really damage Sri Lanka in this series is losing wickets in bundles. As we saw with the West Indies, sometimes there'd be a session where they lost 3-4 wickets and the game just turns on its head. So if Sri Lanka can avoid doing that, they don't want to get drawn into a slugfest with this England team. I think the worst thing they could do is try and take the same approach that England are and say, we're going to try and score at 4 or 5 and over as well. I think they need to show grit. 40 years on from 1984, channel a bit of Sid Wetamooney and bat time. That's what I'd like to see them do. And, I think that if they can bat long and bat big, they give themselves a really good chance.
Absolutely. All right, Nick, thank you so much for joining us. It was a great conversation speaking about the Sri Lanka versus India, and needed to touch a bit on the Sri Lanka versus England since you're in the UK. And, it's great having you. And we don't know when will you next join our channel as well. So wanted to get a bit of intake on the Sri Lanka versus England. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me, Pavan. It's been a real pleasure.
No worries. Yeah. So yeah, do check Nick on Morally End. I think he features quite a bit, and you can even read his book and Islands 11 as well on Amazon if you have time to purchase his book, and you can take it also buy it and have a read on his article on Sri Lanka cricket. So but thank you so much, Nick, once again for joining, and do subscribe the Sports Breakdown, like, comment and share. Thank you so much, Hari, and to a few others who viewed the video today. Unfortunately couldn't take all the comments, but thank you so much for texting, commenting on what's going on, and having some time watching the video. So thank you so much. Do subscribe to the Sports Breakdown, like, comment and share, and we'll get back with the next video, and hopefully do a Sri Lanka versus England preview, maybe again, or let's see what we can do, and maybe cover a bit on the Sri Lanka versus England test series. Let's see what happens on that. But thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much, and good night.